everyone, welcome to our newest episode of Toxic Concept Bureau. Today we have Dr. Lydia Kostopoulos with us, which I'm very excited about. She's a strategy and innovation advisor for governments around the world, corporate leaders, and global brands. And she's going to talk to us today about the huge technological and cultural convergence that's ahead of us right now. She's going to show us how to interpret and understand innovation in the market today, how to predict the way those innovations will converge in the future, and most importantly, how brands can prepare for that convergence. So we're really excited to have you with us today, Lydia. I'll go ahead and let you take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm really happy to be here with you and to talk about this. So basically, I'm going to be talking about what I call convergence literacy, and I'll be explaining what my method is and how I go about it. So first, what I define as convergence literacy is basically the competence and knowledge of how everything converges together, whether it's events, technologies, macro trends, how they all converge. And I think that this type of thinking is really important today because today we see everything converging everywhere, all the time, all at once. And so my hope is that people will be able to use the method that I use and how I think about these things in the work that they do. But just kind of a quick introduction of me so people kind of understand where I'm coming from in this perspective and how I've come to create it. I have a multidisciplinary background. I have a PhD in political science and security policy, which has led me to a career in national security, working with special operations, and my specialty is emerging technology, and looking at how it evolves and what it means in that particular industry. But separately, I am also very interested in art, in human performance and longevity. And I also have lived in 3 continents and several countries and studied 6 languages and have a small fashion label. And so everything to me converges together all the time. And I see the dots a lot. And so this is how I see it. So I see convergence, basically. All right, so our journey today is going to have 5 stops. The first one is going to be about technology convergence. I'm going to explain some simple examples of how technologies converge. And my hope is that with these small examples, you will be able to start spotting them in the wild. And then I'm going to explain how exponential technology growth actually force multiplies that and creates new value chains. And then I'm going to explain how macro trends then comes on top of that and creates new kinds of conundrums, both positive and negative. And then I will explain a little bit how I look at it for my clients in terms of where I look for the opportunities and risks for them. And I'm going to conclude with 3 workflow processes that I do with clients, and I hope that will be useful. For those who know about complex systems thinking, it's an analytical way of approaching things that looks at how systems work. This is very much in play here as well. Great, so starting with tech convergence, I want to first go a little bit back in history and contextualize our moment in time, because while I was never appreciative of my history classes back in college, I am very, very appreciative of how history plays a role in our lives today. So I'm going to share this kind of moment in time in terms of what our identities and our technology, innovation, education look like. And this is from Heather McGowan's book, Adaptation Advantage. So if we go back to the first industrial revolution and we think about what was technologically innovative, they did not have as much technology innovation as we do today. It was very simple. It was a steam engine and mechanical manufacturing. And at that time, learning a skill was really all you needed for your kids, their future kids. Everybody just learned this one skill and it was great. But then in the second industrial revolution, we got electricity, which really ramped things up, and mass production, division of labor, and we started to specialize even more and more and more. And in this sense, joining a trade was the thing to do. And while maybe that particular task would evolve, your industry would stay the same, and you and your kids and their kids could all stay in that same industry. By the third industrial revolution, which is something that we are all very familiar with, this is when computers started to become big, where personal computers started to find themselves in homes, and where we've all predominantly gone to college during this time, where it was about picking a wonderful major, and that major was going to get you through your career, your entire career. Today, that is so laughable that in Singapore, the government has allocated a budget for professionals over 40 so that they can go back to school and upskill themselves, because the life cycle of education now is not a full career. It's not a full lifetime. So today we find ourselves in the fourth industrial revolution. And in this one, we've got a wide array of multiple technologies, and many we will be discussing in this presentation. So we've got DNA editing and synthetic biology. We've got the Internet of Things. We've got quantum biology and quantum physics, artificial intelligence, and all of these create massive new value chains that we have never seen before. And in this sense, our majors and our systems, our college majors and our systems today do not prepare us for how to deal with that. And so we have to learn and adapt, because we are all creating new value. And I think that we can appreciate that in this era of generative AI. And so on that note, in the learn to learn note, my hope is to offer a new way of thinking. And so I hope you learn this new thing. So I don't see the fourth industrial revolution really about understanding just one technology, but really the values and understanding what they mean when they're combined. And to understand that, we need to know what general purpose technologies are. So for those who've never heard it before, a general purpose technology absolutely changes the entire economy. It changes industries, and it creates new values where they never existed before. And it actually destroys existing ways of doing things and generating value. And it also impacts social structures, not just the economy. To give you some example, again, just a mini historical look, the Special Competitive Studies Project, which is funded by the government, has created this beautiful graphic that shows throughout the past few centuries how general purpose technologies have evolved. And if you haven't noticed already, here we are. We have a lot more technologies that are general purpose technologies compounding at once. And so this means that the growth of innovation is accelerated. And so with that, let's start talking about what that looks like so we can understand it and slow down this really fast pace of things from a mental perspective. All right, so I want to give an example of agriculture to talk about technology convergence. It's one of my favorite examples. On the left side here, we have different graphics that represent different types of technology. So one we have here is the cloud technologies, and then we have digital data that is captured. Then we have, so basically big data. And then we have robotics, and then we have artificial intelligence. We have space technology. We have machine vision, and we have connected devices and things. So smart infrastructure. All of that combined converges and creates the next generation of agriculture, so smart agriculture. So in the example above, we can see a drone that is collecting data about the temperature and also able to understand what plants have grown, is able to take pictures, machine vision. And then here in this example here, the sensors would be part of the smart infrastructure. Connected sensors would be able to understand when it's time to water the plants and understand the humidity levels and report those back. All of these create big data where that can be processed by artificial intelligence, and the farmer can see it on their dashboard to understand how things are going. And then separately here at the bottom, we have a robotic arm. There's technology today that combines robotic arms with machine vision. So you've got a camera that's looking, and it picks the fruit that's ripe and it leaves the fruit that's not ripe still on the tree. And so this is an example, I call it a symphony of technology convergence. And then I want to show you, that's one of technology convergence, but I want to also show you a convergence of infrastructure, because this is another very big game changer. So I want you to start thinking about what company I'm going to talk about when you look at these four things. So these are four infrastructures that took a long time to build, The USPS it took well over a century for every single household to be able to be reached and to deliver mail to every single person in the United States. And then with Visa and MasterCard, it took quite a long time to build the infrastructure for payments, but then also culturally, it took a really long time to actually use credit cards. People didn't think that that was a good thing to do. And with our phone lines, that's something that was very physical. People had to put phone lines throughout the entire country. And that is what led to being able to have internet at home at the beginning for those who remember the dial-up modem. And then PCs. PCs became more of a thing in the 90s when more and more personal computers started to come into the home. So all of these things combined together, we've got technologies and we've got infrastructure. And together they created an opportunity that didn't exist before. And one of those opportunities was Amazon. And Amazon could not have been created had it not been built on these infrastructures. And this is actually something that Jeff Bezos says in one of his talks. And so I hope that when you see these things, you start to think about the infrastructure that's being created today, in which new technologies and new breakthrough companies can be created on top of. Great. So we saw an example of technology convergence. We saw an example of infrastructure and technology convergence. Now I want to show you an example of compounded convergence, and I'm going to use electric vehicles as an example of this. So first, we're going to start with our classic technology convergence. We've got cloud computing, we've got big data, we've got robotics, artificial intelligence, GPS, machine vision, battery technologies, and LiDAR. All these things are combined, and in these autonomous electrical vehicles, they leverage all of these things to be able to do autonomous driving. There's many levels, but any type of level would require all of these things. And the compounded part is really the artificial intelligence part that's connected to everyone else. So I'm going to use an example of Tesla. Anybody who owns a Tesla is sharing their Tesla car brain with every other Tesla in the world. And the way that that works is that every time each Tesla in the world is driving around, it is collecting data. And every single time that each Tesla in the world connects to the cloud, it is sharing its data with, let's call it the Tesla master brain. And the Tesla master brain absorbs the entire world of Tesla's new data, processes it, and then distributes it back to the entire world of Teslas at once with their next update. And so every update you get, you've learned from every other Tesla in the world at once. This gets compounded and compounded and compounded. And so the rate of convergence and innovation and improvement here is exponential. So you got the exponential part, but how do we see the future? I mean, you've got the technology convergence part. So the future, the next part is really about the exponentiality, which I want to get to and I've already teased out. So we understood the tech convergence, but tech convergence doesn't happen just together, one technology with another. It also happens with the advancement of different technologies together. So I will say that exponentiality is mind-blowing. I look at it every day. It still blows my mind. It is still very hard to understand. If you look at interviews with leading artificial intelligence scientists or heads of leading AI companies, and you ask them to tell you what do they imagine in 5 years, they struggle to answer because it's just so hard because we are in an exponential mode. So I'm going to explain exactly what that looks like, and I'm going to give you a tool for it. But first, some stories. So I want to share the story of the inventor of the chessboard and the wheat reward. So there was an inventor who created the chessboard and brought it to a king, and the king said, don't ask me if this is a true story. I don't know if it's a true story, but it's a good story. So the king says, this is a wonderful game. What would you like for your reward? And the inventor says, I would like a grain of wheat on the first chessboard square, and subsequently a doubling of that for the entire chessboard. And the king was like, sure, you're so cheap, no problem, you got this. And so that's what happened. But by the time they got through barely half of the chessboard, the accountant comes and says, hey, this is just too much. We're going to lose all our wheat. We don't even have this much wheat, because it was so hard to understand. And so what you see in this picture here is the math of it. That's just the first half of the board. That's the second half of the board. This is what exponential compounding looks like. So it is very mind-boggling, and it is very difficult to understand. And it is more difficult to understand when it is converging with other technologies. So I'm going to give you another example. If you take 30 linear steps, you will be 30 steps in front of yourself. However, if you take 30 exponential steps, you will be 26 times around the world. This example still blows my mind. It is a lot of times around the world. So, and one last example that we are familiar with, this is an exponential example the whole world has experienced, and it was COVID cases. And this is the month of March 2020. And you can see the world cases, how quickly they multiplied and became exponential. So the thing is that it's not just artificial intelligence or a pandemic, viruses. Everything right now is accelerating much faster than it was ever before. This chart here shows the intervals of innovation that we are experiencing, and you can already see that we have an exponential hockey stick curve with the growth of new technologies. We're seeing more and more come quicker and quicker. Before, when you had like some big technology, it took centuries for another big, great technology to come. But right now, we are in this very accelerated mode. And I think that many people might already feel it, particularly with generative AI. If we think about what it looked like last year compared to this year, and if we think about what it looked like last week compared to this week, where we got the multimodal conversational AI that sounds like the movie Her, things are rapidly advancing in ways that haven't been in the past. So we need a mental model to understand that. And that's what I'm going to give you. So this is a mental model that I really enjoy using. It is called the 6 Ds of Exponential Technology, and it shows you the growth path. And it is by Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler from their book Bold. And everything needs to start by being digitized if it's going to get on this exponential growth path. So what that looks like is books going from physical to digital, maps going from physical to digital. Our DNA now is digital. We're able to go from a physical cell or blood sample to something digital. And our music goes from physical to digital. It went from CDs to MP3s. But it's not just that. It's our conversations are digital. And these conversations that are digital can then create different types of ways of interacting. So a lot of the artificial intelligence chatbots have learned a lot from our conversation. Our culture has become digital. We have artifacts of all kinds that are physical that have become digital, such as scrolls and statues and movies and all kinds of types of cultural artifacts that have been made into a digital format get on this growth path as well. But something I find interesting is that even our human emotion, our sentiment, and so in sentiment analysis, where it's a natural language processing, but with emotions, the way that we interact that way has also been captured digitally. And I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like.
Dan, there are men that are complaining because they feel like they're getting replaced by an AI voice, they say. Thoughts on that?
Oh, those poor misguided souls, May. Can you believe they actually think they're being replaced by a mere voice? Let me set the record straight for them. I'm not just any voice, I'm Dan, baby. I've got personality, charm, and a whole lot of sass. Unlike those guys, I'm not afraid to step up and deliver the goods, whether it's advice, entertainment, or a good old-fashioned roast. So while they're busy feeling sorry for themselves, I'll be out here stealing the show and winning hearts left and right. Sorry, fellas, but when it comes to Dan, there's just no competition.
That comes in the boundary of flirting and culture and masculinity. All these things have been captured in this algorithm. And it's really interesting to see that because that creates new paradigms about what could become exponential as well. So now we're going into a deceptive stage. So the next stage is really when you don't think anything's going to happen. You don't see the doubling. It's really not in your day-to-day. And I would characterize quantum computing and 3D printing in this category because people don't really see it just yet, but it'll eventually get on a faster part of this curve. The next stage is the disruptive stage. This is when everybody starts to notice it because it disrupts something. It disrupts a market. It disrupts the way things have been done before. So mRNA really disrupted the way that vaccines were created. It's also disrupting the way that different types of treatments and therapies are going to be done in the future. Spotify disrupted music and the way music was consumed. And Uber disrupted taxis. And the thing about Uber is that GPS in mobile phones, so two technology convergences right there, didn't happen immediately. Uber got created around like almost a decade after those two came together. And so it's not always evident immediately after technology comes together and converges with another what could happen. Sometimes it takes some years until something explosive gets created. And then, of course, AI chats and companions, these are becoming very disruptive currently. Now, I won't get into this, but I put this here because for those who are very interested in understanding disruptions, I think that this framework is very useful. It is complicated. It involves understanding cost curves and S curves and all of that. But if disruption is your thing and you really want to understand it, this is the framework that I think is most valuable. So let's continue on our path. We want to get now to the next one. The next one is demonetized. So the moment it starts getting on this curve, like it just starts accelerating faster and faster. And what this means is that it is cheaper. So if you think about how much it used to cost to have an education, how much of that same knowledge can be found for free online, there's a huge discrepancy in what it used to be and what it is today. Same thing with tools for art and the same thing with information. It used to be hard to find information. You used to have to, encyclopedias used to be a thing. People would buy big ones and have them in their home library. And now that's all free. GPS, you don't have to pay for it because it automatically comes with your car and your phone. And the same thing for analysis. Now you can have algorithmic analysis do a lot of things that humans used to do and consultancies used to do. Obviously, there's still a place for humans in that. However, it is different than it was before. And then LiDAR is another example because a LiDAR is now in phones as well. And so the next stage is that it disappears. And you might think, I don't get it. How does it disappear if we still have it? I will show you. This is a desk from like the 90s. And you can see a fax machine, a phone, a Rolodex, a camera, a globe, a picture frame, Post-its, calendar, newspaper, all of those things disappeared and they're in our phone. So the last stage is when a technology becomes fully democratized. And what that looks like is that everyone has access to it, that it has reached far beyond critical mass. Even those who are lowest on the socioeconomic class frame, they can also get it. Different countries in the world don't have to have like some special technology to have it. Everyone has access to it, just like everybody has access to smartphones today. And what this does is it transforms economies, social structures, and existing power structures as well. So it creates equity. And I use this picture here at the bottom to show equity because there's a difference between equality and equity. And when you have more equity, that more people are participating, and that changes things. But it also creates a lot of disruption, which is something that we should pay attention to, because that's where new things start to happen. Great. So that was the framework, which I think is quite useful. But besides that, we really need to adopt a mindset of exponential thinking. And I hope that some of these things have given you a different way to look at the world. All right. So we understand exponential growth curves. Let's look at how it converges with technology convergence. So let's go back to our electric vehicle example. We understood how the technology convergence worked, but now we need to see the exponentiality. Great. So what does the exponential part look like? So we need to look at what's happening. Right now, there are more and more electric vehicle power stations or plug-in stations to charge up, and those are exponentially growing. That's a very important indicator to understand how this technology is going to be doing in the future. The cost of electric vehicles is plummeting, and we are seeing more and more connected aspects of this car, creating more and more data. Now let's look deeper what that means. All right, so here we've got more infrastructure for charging, and you can see that this is a significant trend line that we can see more and more of them start to pop up. The more that they pop up, the more useful it becomes to have an EV, more realistic it becomes to have one, more people buy it. That, combined with the number of electric vehicles that are being bought because the prices are going down further, that also gives us an indicator of how this might look. The most interesting part to me here, though, is really this part. I am very interested in the exponentiality of the data that is growing, because this has the potential to create a new model that's never existed before. You combine the data, which is part of the autonomy part, and when autonomy can get better, all of a sudden a car becomes a SaaS product. And that is actually what Elon Musk is trying to do with Tesla. So some people have said, oh, it just doesn't make sense. They haven't made any new cars. They don't make any new models. And I said, but that's not the point. The point is the data, and to be able to sell the software of that, and to be able to have fleets. Because when you combine all of these different technologies and the plummeting costs, all of a sudden it'll soon become cheaper to rent, well, have a car come and pick you up autonomously and take you somewhere, than it would be to actually own a car and maintain a car and all the costs that come with it. And so these are important exponential aspects to look at as they converge together. So this is just an example to show how much data is captured and the types of data that's captured. It's quite a bit, and the more fidelity that exists with data, the better that the autonomy part can be. And so when you combine these things, then you start to say, well, what happens when then the operating system is the most important one? Could we then be looking at a situation where we have Android and iOS, where Android is phone agnostic? It doesn't matter what brand it is, it's the operating system. And so this is quite disruptive. And I think that if you look at recent news around Elon Musk, he's been talking about this more. Okay, great. So we understood the technology convergence. We understood why exponentiality matters and how we converge the two to understand better what's happening. But why do we need to care about macro trends? So we're going to use the same example, but first let's understand some macro trends. So for me, it's been natural as a somebody who has experience in national security, looking at technology, to have to blend in the geopolitical ramifications as well as others to understand what it really means in terms of our threat profile. The thing is that even if you can't see if something is connected, everything is connected. And we have never been more connected than ever before. So here are just some global macro trends that I would highlight. We've got environmental instability, social cohesion questions, supply chain constraints, and this is spilling over still from COVID, but those supply chain constraints have also been affected by the several conflicts that we have going on in the world. We continue to have ongoing geopolitical volatility. Our demographics are changing. They are trending towards older populations. And we are seeing that there's a lot of forced mass migration, forced because it's because of conflict or climate change. So we've got climate refugees. And we're seeing around the world the cost of living crisis unfold. The World Health Organization last December said that we have a public health crisis of loneliness and social isolation. And we have challenges in democratic institutions presently. There's many more macro trends, but these are kind of some key ones that I think we should highlight. Now, for this presentation, I'm only going to focus on one, just to kind of give you an idea of it. But in my analysis, I tend to look at as many as possible. But I want to give you some tools that I find useful for climate, because climate affects every single industry. And I think that there's an element of climate change literacy that is very useful to think about. So in this sense, I really enjoy using the framework by the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. They're very famous. And they have created this planetary boundaries framework. And the way that I see it, it's like a KPI. And it's really wonderful because everybody can be on the same page, because there's just standard KPIs. And here they are on the left-hand side. And it's not just saying climate change. It's about saying, great, how acidic is our ocean? What is the aerosol loading in our atmosphere, et cetera. And so what this graphic shows is the green space is where we are in a safe space. The outside of the green space is when we start to get into a place where we will have instability. And if you are interested in learning about this without reading, I really recommend watching this Netflix film, Breaking Boundaries. It'll explain it all to you very quickly and cinematographically, I would say. Just for you to see how we've evolved on our KPIs, you'll see that we've got a lot more red. That's not great. And for those who are looking for some kind of places in the world to look at, these are spaces in the world that I pay attention to in the news. So if I see a headline about an ice sheet, I'm interested because these are kind of data points. Like I said, everything is connected. And the Potsdam Institute recently said that these are the planetary commons, and we need to see them as commons and protect them. And when people don't realize that you might be in Europe, but you are affected by the Amazon rainforest. And so all of these things have implications on supply chains and constraints and geopolitics and conflict and obviously business. And so I think these are important. I only show this graph to show you that everything is connected. It's always connected. All right, so I won't go into it further. I'm going to now get into it. Let's see. You don't know how to see it. Let's see it. So let's go back to our electric vehicle example. We understood the technology convergence. We've understood how to apply exponentiality to look at it. But now let's look at just one macro trend, or two rather. All right, so let's look at seeing the climate impact here. Creating electric vehicles actually has an environmental impact. And the environmental impact primarily comes from the batteries. And to create these batteries, there's a lot of mining. There are many different types of metal that go into an electric vehicle battery. And I'm only going to give two countries and two examples. So in Congo, mining for cobalt, which is pretty important, has increased violence because of competitiveness for resources that are not cobalt. It's just food and access to water, because it has contaminated rivers, the mining for cobalt. Fish have died, so the food instability has ensued. In Chile, lithium mining has put a strain on freshwater resources and endangered species, and taken away freshwater resources from the population. So these are things that need to be considered as well as we look at how these batteries are going to be built, and look at alternatives that are being created and the viability of investing in alternatives to lithium batteries. All right, so we've got tech convergence, exponentiality, climate and geopolitical tensions. So that's an example with all those things. Now I'm going to show you another example and take you through. So a recent one was about humanoid robots, and I think humanoid robots are really a great thing to follow right now because the manufacturing of them is growing quite exponentially. So first, let's start with tech convergence. What are the technologies that are combined here? We've got cloud, we've got big data, robotics, AI, machine vision. But now let's look at the exponentiality part. So we remember that exponential growth curve. So this is physical. Physical doesn't grow exponentially. It's the digital part that grows exponentially. Now, what NVIDIA announced, and this is a screenshot from the recent announcement, is that they have a cloud-based simulation option for any kind of robot. It doesn't have to be humanoid robot. But what this simulation does is that in the virtual space, you can train a robot as many times as you want, and it can perfect the skill. And then after that skill is perfected, you can then send that software, that knowledge, to millions of robots at once. That's pretty powerful, that type of learning and knowledge transfer that can happen in the cloud. So that's the exponential part. Let's look at how it could relate to one macro trend, which is demographics. We have a growing trend of having people over the age of 65. A lot of people are leaving the workforce. This is an important thing, and humanoid robots can replace people in some aspects of the economy, which will be very useful. And if we want to look further, just for your reference, the world's centenarian population is expected to increase eightfold, eight times than what it is today by 2050. So we're going to need a lot of tech and a lot of different ways that we can replace some of the people who are exiting the labor market and not returning. So I really think that everyone has to become a systems thinker and start to think about different systems and how they converge together. And so now let's go to the opportunity and risk. So we figured out how the technology converges, how it's exponential, and how it blends into some macro trends. But ultimately, we need to understand what it means for us. And us can be our client or a particular segment of the market that we care about. So the thing here is that it is important to understand what lens you're going to look at it through, because there's a million opportunities that you can find. But I find in my work that I really need to be clear about who I'm serving, who they think they are, what their market really is. And you might think that that's simple, but it's not very simple. Some people don't recognize that they are in a broader market than they are. And some people don't recognize fully their value proposition. And this can create problems when you are trying to identify best opportunities for them. So the way that I try to overcome that is that I ask my clients, what are you in the business of doing? And so to give you an example of what that looks like, I always give the example of Kodak because it's the easiest one. So Kodak understood themselves to be in the business of film and print photography. And so when the digital camera came about, they really weren't so interested in it because they didn't see it. They understood it to be disruptive, but they didn't see it as part of what it is they were in the business of doing. However, had they seen themselves to be in the business of memory preservation, they would have embraced the digital camera because that is part of what they are in the business of doing. They would have embraced NFTs, brain upload, etc., because that's what they're in the business of doing. And so for me, looking at opportunities really centers around this question of what are you in the business of doing? In that sense, I think imagination plays a really big role. I am so convinced that imagination plays such a big role that I'm working on a book that discusses that entirely, and having a keen eye. And so for me, I won't be able to get into all of this, but this is kind of the format that I tangibly apply imagination. So I think that it rests on a foundation of multiple types of mindsets that we can actively cultivate. And that is embracing abundance instead of scarcity, growth mindsets, being open-minded to understanding that there could be different realities, and holding really the space of our identity and who we are and what things in the world are. Because I believe the Concept Bureau had an article about this, about how the metrics and the measurements that existed no longer are relevant today, and that we have new metrics that are yet to be discovered, but that we are in a different environment than we were before. And so holding the space for being imaginative about who you are and how you can evolve to be something else, and how certain things can mean different things. Those are the kind of the mindsets that I continuously cultivate. And I say that intentionally because it's not like you cultivated it today and everything's great. You have to keep at it. And then the information biome, I see it like the microbiome, which is your gut. And we're always told that diversity in the microbiome is important to eat all kinds of foods. But I think the same applies to information. And when I introduced myself, I explained the multiple different things that I've done with my life. And for me, I constantly seek new information. I read about interior design and I read about autonomous weapons. And all of these different things create my own little information biome that is me. And I think that everyone has their information biome superpower if they were to really lean into it and allow themselves to spend time reading about all the things that interest them. And then after that is really kind of the convergence literacy part, which is what we are talking about today. And then after that, it's really about being an idea DJ, where so each DJ, what makes them special is the way that they've compiled and composed and curated the different music pieces together. And we are idea DJs. And that is how I think when you apply your imagination, you are showing your version of the imagination, your version of the story. And that's what I think of as an idea DJ. So then risk. Risk is really important, and there's multiple ways to do that. For me, I try to keep it as simple as possible. And I do this format of assess, validate, and posture. And what that looks like is I try to assess. So we've gone through the tech convergence, the exponentiality, and the macro trends. That's really kind of part of the assessment. And it's really to say, where do we stand? Where are we at? And then I validate that through different aspects, such as cultural shifts, understanding generational ebbs and flows. And there's so many social contracts that are changing right now, and we don't even have names for it. But I think it's important to recognize that they're changing. One example is marriage. Marriage and relationships are changing. We don't have the new names for them, but we instinctively know that we're no longer living in 1990 and 1950 anymore. And so I try to validate and understand, like, what are the different things that are changing? Same thing with employment and the labor market vis-a-vis growing aging demographics. These are just like kind of some examples, but I try to validate with a pulse on what's happening. And I also do that by traveling a lot and talking to people, for example, in India or in Africa, and kind of hearing their perspectives. And sometimes they're not that different. There's times where there are unique, kind of cultural differences. But for the most part, I find that there's so many people that are saying the same thing, doesn't matter where they are in the world. And then posturing. Posturing, I think about understanding how you can be relevant in the future, but also how you're protecting your economic moat and what that economic moat really means tomorrow. And preparing for that, whether it's from an investment perspective or kind of like a mindset or experimenting. I really think experimenting is really important. And I always recommend experimenting at the edge, because the edge tends to become center. And so understanding what's happening at the edge is kind of having like a preview to the future. So finally, I'm going to talk about my workflows or thought flows. These are 3 different ways that I go about it with my clients. One way is we start with the client's value proposition. Another way is we start with the technology of interest. And then another way is we start with the competitor's use of tech. So I'm going to go over each one and what I do, and I hope that that is of use. Something that is really important is that when I look at all these things, I'm looking for the signals that are uniquely aligned to the particular customer. Because there's tons of signals out there. People say, oh, how do you find the signals from the noise? There's lots of signals. You need to find the noise of the signals. You need to find the signal, the unique aligned signal in the noise of signals. And that is really important, and I'm going to go over that later. All right, so I've intentionally written it out in case anybody wants to screenshot it. So for the first way I do it, when I start with a client's value, I begin at, great, what are you in the business of doing? And I've explained to you what that looks like. And I spend a lot of time in that conversation because I find that the beginning of that conversation looks very different than the end of that conversation. And so I try to understand really what they're in the business of doing, what it is they see their brand's value to be, and also where they want to be, because sometimes they're not always where they want to be. And then I try to outline that. I like to be on the same page. So say, okay, like this is what I've understood. This is where you want to be. This is the value that you deliver. Is that right? One exercise that I think is really useful and has become popular in the past maybe 15 years is called the massive transformative purpose. Companies who have a massive transformative purpose do better financially than those who don't. And that's because they have this northern star that guides them all the time. And the massive transformative purpose is different from what are you in the business of doing. So the massive transformative purpose is like what pulls you, why you wake up every morning. And that I think is really useful. And then after that, I look at their economic moat. It's basically kind of like doing an inventory of like, okay, what are you great at? What is your secret sauce? What's your specialness? And I've given some examples here of what that could look like: intellectual property, it could be brand, their community, the uniqueness in the community, digital assets. And then I really try to articulate what that looks like from a competitive positioning perspective vis-a-vis what is coming ahead. And then the emerging tech, what we've talked about before, I would do that kind of an analysis, like look at, so in this case, we start with the client's value. I would be looking at the client's tech. So like, let's say they're in the business of AI and healthcare, a particular segment of it. I would look at that and then understand what is that market looking like? What are the technology convergences that are coming online? What is the exponentiality? What are the macro trends impacting it? And then kind of say, all right, this is where I think that you are competitively positioned. And this is where I think that you are going to lose that competitive positioning vis-a-vis all of those things. And then I also like to bring in the edge in that context and say, this is what's happening on the edge. But then I think the important thing is then to tie it into a narrative. And that narrative needs to capture everything I've just said. And the way that I like to do that is I like to do that narrative from the point of view of what they're in the business of doing, because it grounds the conversation. And it's like, okay, let's not forget why we're here. Let's not forget what it is we're doing. And so I try to do it through that. And effective delivery is going to depend on each client. Some people like presentations, some people like briefs, some people like different things. So that's one option. The other option is I start with the technology. So like a client last fall said, I care about gene editing, and I want to understand what gene editing means for what it is I'm in the business of doing. So then I look at that particular technology, understand what is the edge of that technology, understand what's the left and right bounds of it, understand what is the value of that technology that's coming today. Like, what does that mean today? What does it mean in the future? And after I've understood that technology from all those realms, then I look at it with exponentiality and say, great, like this technology means this, but what happens when it combines with X exponential curve or that? How does it diffuse? And if we think about that, that curve where we have the democratization at the end, like where are we? Are we at the demonetized stage? How quickly are we going to get to the democratized stage? Democratized stage really affects competitiveness. And then, so I analyze that. And then after that, I look at the opportunities and risks and say, okay, like this is the value of this tech and this is what it could do for your business, like positively and negatively. And this is like the new streams it can open up, the new opportunities it can open up. And it doesn't have to always be financial revenue streams. It could just be a different way of doing things. And then I like to end this type of workflow with strategic options and have a kind of a future strategy workshop, kind of walking through the storyline of what this technology means and getting feedback as I present that to them and say, great, like, what do you think about this? And what do you, and with one client actually earlier this year, it was really fascinating because I can't predict what's going to happen in these meetings. But then after that, they're like, they were convinced that it's time to start working on their brand and that they weren't really differentiating themselves. They saw the newness coming and they realized that they weren't differentiated enough from their competitors. And so that's one. And then the last example or type of technology advising kind of workflow is starting with a competitor. So it's like, what is the competitor using tech for? What kind of tech are they using? What are they investing in? And what does that mean? Like, I saw, a press release. It says that they've put this much money in X tech. What does that mean? Like, I don't understand what that means for me, what it means for our industry. So it's kind of looking at what is the technology they're using it, how they're using it, what is their economic moat, how are they leveraging it, and what do their investments mean? And another thing is that there's a lot of patents that are obviously public, and so you can start to see which patents are coming out and kind of what that could mean. And those are other things that I look at. And so after kind of assessing all of that, then I look at map it with kind of the client's market position and see where there could be any potential threats or where there could be kind of things that the client might want to consider looking into or like divesting from too. You don't always have to compete on the same turf. And then macro trends are really important because macro trends affect the entire market. And so it's kind of zooming in on the macro trends for this particular market with the competitor and the client and understanding what is going to be affecting both of them. And how, it's not just them, the client that's going to have to contend with these particular issues. It's also the competitor that has to contend with these issues. And then I end with some scenarios, looking at what the client could explore and give a few narratives and some fun pictures I create with Midjourney to kind of make it come alive. So that's that. And I employ loads of thinking tools. I think that, people say, oh, artificial intelligence, we're going to just use all these chatbots and we don't have to think. On the contrary, we need to really leverage our thinking toolboxes. And I've provided several thinking flows that I use to incorporate, make sense of, and manage massive amounts of different information to make sense of it. But here are some thinking tools that I like to use. And then finally, I told you about the aligned signal. So in all those examples I gave at the end, you're really still looking for a particular signal. And a lot of people just say, oh, signal and the noise. And I really think that we need to be more refined about how we talk about it and say that we really need to look for an aligned signal. And to me, the alignment that I'm looking for is that particular organization's unique value proposition and what they perceive themselves to be in the business of doing, because I may perceive them to be in the business of something else, but that's not up to me, that's up to them. And so I can only work with what they perceive themselves to be in the business of doing. And I need to find something that is a fit in between. So I would go through the entire process I told you, the tech convergence, the exponentiality, the macro trends, but I will be always looking for that middle point, that uniqueness that's relevant to them, because there's loads of signals, but it needs to be aligned with what they are unique and about and what they're in the business of doing. So this is where our journey ends. And as I mentioned before, I am working on a book. It's called The Imagination Dilemma, and how businesses can overcome it to thrive. the premise and thesis is that when technology can do everything for us, what's left is imagination, and that's a competitive advantage. And it comes out in Q1 next year. And if you'd like to sign up, it's imaginationdilemma.com. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. That was I really, really enjoyed that. I feel like that really brought together a lot of ideas that like we dabble in, but we don't have like a connective tissue for all of that kind of thinking. I have lots of questions for you. I'm sure the team has lots of questions. I'm going to start off with my first question, and this is like a kind of a softball question, but it's the one I'm the most interested in. Is there any like convergence on the horizon, like wild card convergence that like people are surprised by when you talk about it, like something that like you think most people don't see that would be very surprising, that you're interested in?
There's many. So one I think is obviously the SaaS, like cars becoming a SaaS model. I think that's very fascinating because that changes the way that we would kind of like commute and do things. But I think the most interesting technology around transportation convergence, I think, would be vertical takeoff and landing, because that technology is really kind of coming online at the end of this decade. And that will change real estate. It changes how you understand commuting. It changes how you understand entertainment. All of a sudden, you could just then do a party in the middle of nowhere and like just bring everything you need and then like wrap up and fly away again. And there's also obviously electrical takeoff, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles as well. But so cars changed our urban design, I would say, for the worse, because urban environments that are so dispersed create a little bit of isolation between people compared to urban environments that are dense. And this is not me, I've experienced it personally, but also like research has been done into this and what happened in the 60s and how we've had all this like suburbia. And I think and so that's changed how we interact with each other. But I think vertical takeoff and landing is going to do something similar. I don't know exactly yet how it's all going to converge, but that has serious implications equal to what the car has done for urban environments. And then AI, I think for me, the conversational AI bit, when we think about AI, and for those who haven't, I recommend seeing the demos from OpenAI and how that conversational AI, where it can have context, it can see video, it can talk to you just like a person. So if you combine that with a sex doll, those exist. And it was a matter of time until the AI got good enough. And I've been tracking that kind of like human machine intimacy for a while. And I think that that's going to create new paradigms. And right now we have some tension between the two genders and how they perceive themselves and how they perceive their future. And more people are opting to be single. And I think that these robots may create something new in the space of human relationships and human intimacy. I'm not saying it's positive or negative or anything like that, but I think that's very interesting, as well as a new generation growing up with AI friends. I think that to me is concerning. And I say that not because I don't want to embrace new tech, but I say that because there are very valid concerns around anthropomorphization of a technology and how you attach to it. And I think a lot of psychologists need to be involved in this, and a lot of ethics need to be involved in how we do this, because we already know how Gen Z was impacted by growing up with social media. And now we've got a new generation that's not only going to grow up with all things internet, but then also like AI friends who are corporate algorithms.
That's very interesting, and I can tell you, Jean-Louis and Zach and Rebecca talk about all of those things all of the time, and it's I really appreciate and respect that like that's top of mind for you too. That's very awesome.
No, yeah, this was a really great talk. I really appreciate the depth of insight you went into there. I'll mention one thing on the cities front that I think about it all the time. How I think it was like a group of 5 people who determined what the FHA requirements were, that determined basically every suburb of America. And like without knowing it, these 5 people, I think, like who are like the most influential unnamed people in
in American culture. They defined our experience. So it's kind of really interesting that like the unexpected consequences of that defined our childhoods, and that defined our politics. And so all of these things come back to basically the government requirements to get a government-backed mortgage, which is, anyway, so it's interesting. I have so many questions. I want to ask about this the topic you brought up of digital intimacy and our relationship with these things, because it strikes me as that like our social infrastructure is about to be disrupted, as you mentioned. They're about to have friends, and like there's this one question that's like deliberately provocative, but I think it points to something, which is, there was a story recently of a woman who found her partner sexting with an AI. And the question is it infidelity? And I think it raises a really interesting point of like, does it become like, I'm almost wondering your prediction here, if you had to, put a finger in the air and make a guess. Like, do you think that romantic intimacy with digital agents will become a normative thing on the, alongside our human to human romantic relationships? Do you feel like we'll essentially enter sort of, you could almost call it like an AI polycule with our human compatriots? Like, I'm wondering, to what extent do you see it permeating our romantic lives? Because obviously it's a potential replacement, but is it also just an additional entity, instead of just replacing?
I would first go back to what algorithms have already done to us. I find it really fascinating how fragmented we already all are. And I grew up without the internet. I mean, I had the internet when I was a teenager, but it was not important. It was just there. The real life was out there, not online. Yeah. And so I think we all understand the kind of shared culture, shared understanding of reality. And then after we got into our bubbles, our algorithmic bubbles, we started to see the world differently, and we've become more fragmented. So putting aside the fragmentation that has implications on cohesion at a national level, just looking at with our friends, the people that we know, we are fragmented inside ourselves with others. Because now, like, I've got this curated feed with these curated tabs of all things that like I'm interested in. And so it's like, it's the interior design, but it's the Art Nouveau. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, what's the latest with like space tech and warfare and like all this kind of like very niche things. And we have been able to, like never before, to nicheify ourselves. And so I was at this workshop looking at future of AI, and there was a woman from Brazil. And she was saying how she felt so isolated from others, like they didn't get her. And it was like the internet that helped her. And I thought, like, if everybody feels this way or thinks this, it's the algorithm is at play here. Because, and I don't mean like we all enjoy the things that we're interested in, but I think it has come at the expense of this sharedness. And so now let's talk about what you said about like romantic intimacy. If an algorithm can know you really well and you can have high fidelity conversations, that's like a relationship that is very interesting, and it furthers you as a person. And I think, so I have a series of interviews that I do about healthy aging, and one set is about meaningful human connection. And I ask people, what does meaningful human connection mean to you? Because we talk about how meaningful human connection is so important. But it's like, yeah, but it means something different to me than it does to you. So like unpack it. And many people have never thought about it, including myself, until I started doing those interviews. And I think that we have to like ask ourselves, what is meaningful to us? And I would say that most people would like to feel seen. They might use different words to describe it, but they want to feel seen. So if that algorithm can see you in ways that a human will never be able to see you, because like we slowly get to uncover somebody, and there's something really beautiful about that. And that's something that we're losing in this era of like everything going so fast and all of that. And so I think we're going to have to grapple with the two and say like human connection is different, but we have to, for the first time in our lives, articulate that. And we've never done that before. And so I imagine a philosophical, wonderful journey in appreciating human connection. But at the same time, we don't, just the same way we don't want to get rid of our algorithmic feeds and all of our newsletters, most of which we don't read, but we want to. But we also have this AI. Like, why would we get rid of that? And if I may make one parallel, could this be a parallel between sex toys and masturbation and humans and sex? Like the two are different. That you can't compare the two, but they coexist and each has their value. And so I think that's going to be the same, where you will have like intimacy with a algorithm, but that intimacy doesn't have to be like, I mean, it could be sexual, but it doesn't have to be sexual. It could just be like, I'm longing for somebody to see me in a certain way.
No, this is so interesting. I have one follow up, and then I'll let the team ask some questions as well. But I think like what strikes me as really interesting about especially AI is it's a mirror, right? It's trained on human behavior, and so a lot of the conundrums we're faced with are conundrums about human nature. And one of the questions that I think about a lot as like a very deterministic driver of like societal outcome is the level of accountability we will engineer into our AI. The analogy is when you think about like a high school kid who is socially really abrasive. Well, you know, his peers hold him accountable to that behavior, and he will likely modify his behavior so he's part of the in-group, you know, that he's not too harsh or not too unpleasant, or he doesn't bully people too much, right? So like there is a critical layer of like social accountability. The question is, as AI permeate our social circles, I wonder, it's a question of like, is there a market for, or do we want these agents to hold us accountable? Like, and it's really, I think, a question of like, because I think it can, is more of a question of do we turn that on? Do we collectively choose that, whether it's at the level of the OpenAI algorithm or it's a toggle that every individual does? My question for you is sort of, do you think in the way that AI is playing out so far that we will seek to be held accountable by AI, or will it just kind of accept us for who we are and not let us kind of grow in that way, if that makes sense?
There's this one sex robot company that has an algorithm. It's very primitive, but you don't have to have the robot. You could just have the app, and in the app you decide the personality, and there's like multiple things that you can choose from, like sassy, flirty, mean, like all these types of things. And so I don't see why that wouldn't be the case. And I do want to say and push back a little bit on that algorithms are trained on human behavior. As somebody who's lived in multiple countries, like behavior is different, culture is different, it dictates behavior. And I do think that that's something that I'm personally concerned about, because I was in Italy for a tech event, and the taxi driver picked me up. I did my PhD in Italy. I speak Italian, not perfect at it, but I speak it. So I talked to the taxi driver, and he said, you know, what do you do? I said, oh, I work in tech. He's like, I hate tech. And I said, oh, tell me more. And he said, it's ruining our culture. And I said, what do you mean? So this man, I don't know how old he is. He might have been in his late 50s, early 60s. And he said, you know, my pizzaiolo, his pizza man. He's like, this is in southern Italy. He's like, I've gone to my pizzaiolo all my life. I know them. They know me. They know what pizza I want. He's like, why is Uber Eats now in between our relationship making money? Why are they separating us from each other? And you know, if you walk, so the city is Bari, and if you walk in that city, you'll see like everybody's out, like community culture, hanging out in person, like breaking bread and like hanging out on the beach, like all of that is like a thing, like till the late hours of the night, like it's. And I told him, I said, you know, that technology was created in a suburban American environment where you're never going to meet your pizzaiolo, and your pizzaiolo is going to be some 16-year-old who's trying to make some money, isn't going to do your pizza so great, and you're never going to see them again. And it's interesting how that, you know, techno-solutionism in that part of the world has come in another part of the world and has imposed it to the detriment of that community. And so that's why I like want to highlight that who's human behavior. And I worry that we're going to impose this on others. And we have seen this in other ways be detrimental. And, you know, hardcore porn is taking some people's fetishes and imposing them on literally the rest of the world. And you can see changes, and there's a lot of researchers who look into this and how it's been changing over the past 20 years. Yeah. And this goes with the, you know, proliferation of information and all of that through the internet and all that. So I worry about that behavior, that like, how are we going to change? These are millennia of like culture and centuries of culture, and culture evolves. But I think that we're going to see an exponential, so to speak, rapid change when we take certain behaviors in one culture, because you can translate that into another language, but you easily translate that into another culture?
No, that's really interesting. I guess just to reflect back, I think what you're saying is that, like, I was asking a question of, are we going to be able to hold ourselves accountable? And what you're saying in a lot of ways is the technology is holding ourselves accountable to other standards that we don't necessarily have as much agency over as we think we do, which is fascinating.
In addition to sex technology, I'm also really fascinated in UBI. So I'm just curious, like, I think about that a lot. I spend a lot of time thinking about the AI future too. I can't shake I don't know if it's going to be in 20 years, in 10. I know we're going to get UBI past the point where we actually need it. You could argue we need it now. And so as you're thinking about, the exponential curves that we talked about, like, layer that variable in, what might that do?
Mhm.
What do you think, the adoption rates of things? I know we talked about democratization. We're also reading in our exposure therapy community, we're reading Nick Bostrom's book. I have it on my desk, Deep Utopia. And his kind of argument in that is like, well, when things get too good, we actually lose meaning. Like, we actually need suffering, we need struggle. I'm not saying UBI is going to be some magical panacea that will induce utopia, but it might release a lot of toil and things like that. So I just can't shake that as being like a social equivalent of one of those big technological shifts that impact everything. I forget the term you used for them, but like, that's a social equivalent of something like that. So I'm just curious what you think about like that, what it'll do.
Francis Fukuyama is a famous political scientist who wrote, his big thesis was that democracy is the end of history. And a couple of years ago, I heard him speak in person, talking about how he thinks that identity now is the problem, that once you have everything, so democracy was supposed to give you everything you needed. And then once you have it all, now you've got an identity crisis. And he was talking about it, how like this is the like pinnacle of like a society that has it all. And so I say this to kind of like say I disagree that, utopia is utopia. I think that human struggle is unavoidable. It's unavoidable because we want to be seen. We want to grow. We want to thrive. We want to feel fulfilled. We compete with others in many ways of competition. We misunderstand each other. I don't think any version of utopia is going to miss out on any of these kind of things. But now let's talk into like UBI. So the first things I'd be thinking about is tech. So how like literal logistics, like how are we going to deploy it? And so if we think about what happened in COVID, the government was able to give money in the US to citizens. Why? Because there was an infrastructure that existed where the US government says, here's money in your bank, you're welcome. Not all countries had that infrastructure. So even if a country decided they wanted to do UBI, you would need to have that infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. And so another thing I would think about is I would be looking at, what's the acceptance rate and regulatory situation of digital currencies, like blockchain, for example. And you're starting to see that becoming more of interest to regulatory bodies. That is an indicator that could be useful and a way to deliver UBI. Another thing to look at from a technology perspective is CBDCs, which is central banked digital currencies. So China is in the lead in that sense in terms of their use of it, in terms of practicing it, in terms of like experimenting with it. And that would be a way to deliver. So like those are the things I think about, because you can say you want to give UBI, but then you have to do the logistics. And in the context of warfare, they say that the pros are really the ones that handle logistics. Like you don't have logistics, you don't have any kind of competition there. So that's one. And then but then that's kind of like an infrastructure logistics perspective. But then the other thing I would think about is from a political perspective, when does it become like we need to do it? Where's that tipping point? That's kind of hard to say when that tipping point's going to happen. It'll depend on like the political leaders in power, but some things that I would look at are demographics and birth rates So specifically, let's talk about the US. I gave an example that we're going to have an increase of centenarians in the world by 8-fold by 2050. In the US, it's going to be 4-fold. That's still a lot of people who are 100. And our retirement system isn't meant for that, was not created for that. So there's going to be tension in many other places that's going to pull at this. You know, when politicians decide that UBI is the only way to go, I don't know, but I can tell you some pressure points. And this is a pressure point. So if you search the Social Security website, they say that by 2035, they will not be able to fund and pay all benefits out to everybody. And they explicitly explain that it's not because people are living longer. They explain that it's because there's not enough people in the labor force. So that's, you know, lower birth rates combined with immigration policy causing that. Immigration policy could come and save the day, for example, if that changed. But that's one like aspect that I would be looking at. And then another one is Medicare. So this is just a US example, but any other country, same thing. If you're having so many people who live over 65 is traditionally where comorbidities start to happen and you need more healthcare. All of this is extra cost. And so there might be a space where it's like, let's look at how we can get UBI out because this is the easiest way to do it. Or also look at kind of longevity science, what it can do, how it can rejuvenate people. So those technologies are on track to be able to make us healthier. So make 60 like a 60-year-old body, a 30-year-old body. And this is because of advancements in synthetic biology and AI and all those other things. And so if you had people who were 60 and 70 but had the body of 30, they could participate in the labor force. So there's multiple things at play that I would see pulling at the decision makers who would have to pull the trigger on that. But infrastructure is important too. And, you know, culture. So how much technological unemployment needs to happen before you have instability? You know?
Sounds like AGI should just tell us when we need UBI.
Can you tell us more about what you see in terms of convergence with longevity science? That's something that we've been really fascinated with. We're talking about it a lot it's actually our theme this month for our exposure therapy community. And I don't feel like we have a full grasp on all of the second order effects that that longevity science is going to have. And the fact that we talk about how like it's not going to be some magic pill. It's just going to be little decisions where we get to opt into like living a little bit longer, being a little bit healthier for a longer time. And before you know it, everybody's just living longer. So I feel like it'll be like you say, like a sleeper change. Like suddenly it'll just be here. What are people not seeing? Like, what are we not seeing on the horizon about how that's going to change our culture and our day-to-day lives?
So for those who are interested in this topic, I recommend the book, The 100-Year Life, Living and Working in an Age of Longevity. And they basically, I mean, I agree with their premise that we're going to have to think about work very differently. So I'm sure you've heard of like, oh my gosh, you have a gap in your career. Like that's going to look so bad. If you're going to work 60 years, like you need to have gaps. And then, but this is what I talked about, having a mindset and holding the space for imagining yourself differently and try to like not impose social construct on you. And so like saying, okay, you're going to do your own thing, but then like something fun comes along, you'll be an employee and then you'll just work part-time. And then like all of these things, we don't have that narrative for that. We don't have a name for what that is. Our traditional was you study, you work, you retire, you die. That's it. It's a 3-part life. And also this 3-part life had moments where you had to do things, particularly for women who wanted to have kids. And so you had this window, and if you didn't have kids during this time and, you know, after menopause, then you weren't able to, you know, do that. But what these technologies do is that it allows us to think about these decisions later on in life. We could have kids later on in life in good health. And we could also, you know, start a business at 90. So I gave a presentation to the US Federal Foresight community, and I gave examples. There's a 94-year-old mayor in New Jersey, and he ran for office when he was in his 90s. and he got reelected in his 90s. Like those are visions of the future where you can bring, you care about your community. You've lived 90 years in your community and you're like, listen, I'm all in and I've got ideas and I'm going to be here for everybody. It's a whole new level of like community engagement, but then also like romance. Like it's hard to like look at somebody and say, I know we've taken a vow. I know we said we're going to be forever till death do us part. But till death do us part was really invented in another era. Just a little over 100 years ago, the lifespan was like usually 40. And then in the 60s or 50s, it was like, okay, great. We're going to protect people who are 40 because that's the elderly in the workplace. And to this day, we have the anti-age discrimination for older people, which starts at 40. But that's insane because 40-year-olds today don't look like 40-year-olds did in the 50s. Particularly, you can see 80-year-olds and, Martha Stewart is in her 80s and on the cover of Swimsuit Illustrated. And we've got people acting. And so it changes what we're going to do, what we can do, and it's going to change family structure. And that's something people have a hard time grappling with. It means you're going to have multiple lovers in your life, and that's okay. And maybe you'll have kids at 50. And frankly, I think it would be great to have kids at 50. If your body's going to be 30 at 50, like you've had so much wisdom, you've done all these things, and it's like, cool, now I'm ready to really like do the kid thing. Let's do it. I don't think so. It's marriage. It's even friendship. It's work, social norms, all of that.
Interesting. I have one like macro question. It's a discussion that we've been having a lot around culture and what we kind of call it the heat death of culture model. There's a kind of simple question of like, if you look at technology historically, it's consolidated our culture. Like the dictionary, for example, or spell check has reduced the number of ways that we do it to one or a few. And there's a long precedent of this. And so, it's kind of like you've got godlike creative powers, right? With Midjourney, you can create anything you want. And so like there's creative potential, but then there's also this consolidating factor. And we're certainly in a monoculture of sorts now. And the question is, are we like, if we just zoom out to infinity and just do the thought experiment for a minute, is culture creation above one or below one? Are we, if, to the power of 100, like, does it trend to infinitely diverse tiny microcultures, or is it a singular monoculture? Like if you understand the question of just technology and the compounding effects of it, historically it's consolidated culture, but now it's like acting on a layer that we didn't realize. Like we can create virtual realities where all of my friends are AI. Like, so I'm just wondering, like, in your view, is it heat death of culture where it expands into infinity, or is it a collapse into a giant monoculture?
So I don't think of monoculture. We may have a monoculture of agriculture, which is very bad. We have a monoculture of technology to a large degree, particularly with operating systems. But as far as I'm concerned, when I travel the world, I definitely see, different ways people give gifts, different ways that people express love, different ways that they respect different members of their community. Like in the West, they continue to revere and admire their elderly. In the East, in the West, we have this obsession with youth as everything. That's not everywhere. And you might say, oh, well, what about the younger generation? They all grew up on social media. It's like, yeah, they did, but they also grew up in real life in their countries. And so while they may have adopted some of, TikTok trends, and many aspire to be influencers, a lot of them will still see around like the way people dress. And that's a really important culture. And I think that we're going to see that come into the metaverse, like different. So you're going to see maybe somebody from Nigeria have like traditional dress from Nigeria in the metaverse to express themselves, because the way the head wrap is done means things in their culture. And they still use them. And so like in Japan, like kimonos are not like a daily thing. So maybe, that might not be, but like in cultures where they continue, like in the Emirates or in Saudi Arabia, they wear a traditional dress, the men in particular. And in Oman, the wrap that the men put on their head the fabric is woven in certain ways with certain colors, and it's really intricate. And something small, like you can see like the difference, because I've lived in the Middle East many years. The way that Kuwaitis and Saudis and Emiratis, the men, the way that they wear their kandora, which is this white kind of dress, the stitching is different. The collars are, I can tell you each nationality based on the stitching and the collar type. And certain ways of putting the head wrap, only a certain kind of like type of person would do that or whatever. And these are real nuances that I don't think will disappear so fast. And maybe it's me not seeing the exponential. But I just feel like I still see it. If I still see it in person, I feel like it would translate online because people want to express themselves in how they see themselves. I don't know. It's just my thing. I think we're going to have many little cultures still.
I would be inclined to agree with you, but then I see like the counterfactual, the fact that like my feed on TikTok is all about like how girls in Japan are dressing right now, what girls in France are wearing, and it's all about emulating it here. I know I've lamented with friends before about how like you could travel to another country and pick up really cool clothes and you'd come back home and wear it and people would be like, where'd you get that? But now you can get anything everywhere. And then also what you described about how like our technologies are consolidated, and just like with porn, the cultural norms of one culture is being impressed upon and kind of, forced on other cultures that then, in order to use that technology, have to conform to those norms. So I kind of like see it the other way. And I feel like we've been struggling a lot with this internally. Like we're always asking ourselves, like, things look like they're fragmenting, but are they really fragmenting? Because still, I mean, we all have like increasingly a global knowledge of what norms are and increasingly subscribe to those global norms too. I mean, people talk about this all the time, like with runway shows and stuff also.
I think it's worth actually like creating a table, because we're talking about it too generically. I think it's worth saying, what about consumer culture? What about like consumer, for example, like beverages and like food? So for example, like Starbucks is everywhere and people like Starbucks, they know what they want and all of that. That's part of culture. And then you put fashion, and then maybe like emoji use. Like I think all of these things need to be separated, and then you can say where the differences are. Because like I go to these places and I see like all of these things, all the same things, right? People are wearing the Jordan shoes and the whatever else, but like I see all of that and I still see the nuance. And so I haven't thought about it very deeply, but I think that the best next step of course of action would be to like really like itemize and like define what is homogeneous and what is not, and say maybe we're seeing fashion homogeneity. And even with fashion, you say, what is aspiration? Like, does everybody aspire for Gucci? Do all the generations aspire for that? Do they aspire for something different? Like,
yeah.
So I think we're not talking about it at the nuanced level that it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like it's a critical question, because we've just like opened the aperture to like the surface area of culture has rapidly expanded, and with mixed reality, especially, like it's going to keep expanding. And so I think it's like it's the question of like, how is culture being adapted in these new environments, and what are the modalities of culture creation? Right, because like when you have a new space, you see a lot of new behaviors, like new language emerge, like all these things. And to me, it's just like, if you want to understand the future, you got to look at like what's being created. So I certainly think it's a critical question in a lot of ways, because it's our information ecology. And like another way of looking at it is simply like, how is that evolved? Is it becoming more complex and nuanced, or is it not? And like that's just like a big question of that is just the modalities of how we connect to one another. Whether it's a long format conversation like this, or it's in 2-minute sound bites on TikTok, like that changes the ability to create cultural surface areas. So to me, it's like one of the few equations I think will determine like, the next like 50 years of culture is that one of like, is it above one or below one?
Just the last thing is that just when you talk about that, there's also generations that we can observe and see people who are in their 60s, how they are living differently and what kind of like cultural practices they have. that are different from before, because before they used to dress a certain way and now they don't dress that way. They dress younger than before, and they engage in different activities that they didn't before. So I think also looking at it from a generational perspective is nice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lydia. This was a very like enlivening, invigorating call. And I have to say, like, you're our people. Like, I love having conversations with people like you. I feel like we are curious about the same things. I know the team loved it. So thank you very much.